when the sea finally grows quiet and the cannons fall silent, where do pirates and sailors go to rest their hearts? At the edge of a silver harbor, there is an inn that only wakes when the ocean sleeps, a warm, lantern-lit haven where rough hands are healed, torn sails are mended under moonlight, and fierce voices soften into low, soothing stories. In Tales from the Harbor Inn, Life Between Voyages, you'll leave the storm behind and step into the gentle, secret world of pirates at peace, sharing bread, soft music, and whispered dreams of faraway shores. Stay, listen, and let this calm, magical tavern rock you like a quiet tide until your own eyelids grow heavy and sleep feels as close as the next breath. Evening came softly to the little harbor, like a shawl of mist laid over the shoulders of the sea. The last streaks of sunset had faded into pale rose and lavender, and the sky was turning a deep, dreamy blue. One by one, the stars began to appear, shy at first, then brighter, as if they too were drawing closer to listen to the quiet of the night. The water in the harbor moved with a slow, peaceful rhythm, rocking the moored ships in a gentle cradle of silver ripples. Along the edge of the pier, wooden posts stood like patient old guardians, wrapped in ropes and seaweed, watching the tide come and go as it had for countless years. At the far curve of the bay, where the cobbled street met the worn planks of the jetty, stood the Harbor Inn. It was not a grand building, and from a distance it seemed almost to lean into the wind, as though listening to the whispers of the waves. Its roof tiles were weathered by salt and time, its walls softened by sea air, but its windows shone with a steady, golden glow. Lanterns hung beneath the eaves, their glass panes slightly clouded, their light warm and inviting. In the deepening dusk, those lanterns appeared like little suns caught in a net, shining gently against the coming night. Inside, the inn breathed a quiet, patient life of its own. The wooden beams overhead were dark and smooth, rubbed by the touch of many hands and the passing of many nights. The floor was marked by the prints of countless boots, but tonight the sound of those boots was slow and soft, more a shuffle than a march. In the wide main room, a fire burned low in the hearth, its flames small and steady, not leaping or roaring, but gently folding over the wood like the petals of a flower. The smell of bread and herbs lingered in the air, mingling with the faint, clean scent of the sea that slipped in through the cracks around the door. The innkeeper stood near that door, as he always did when the evening deepened and the tide turned toward night. He was not a tall man and not a loud one. His face was lined by salt and wind and years of listening, but his eyes were kind and steady. He wore a plain woolen vest and a shirt the color of cream, rolled neatly at the sleeves, and his hands were strong and gentle. He knew the sea's moods the way others knew the seasons, and he understood that there was a time for storms and a time for silence. The Harbor Inn, he believed, belonged to the silence between. Outside, footsteps approached along the pier, slow and weary. The innkeeper lifted his head and listened, feeling the familiar rhythm of boots on wood. These were not the pounding steps of men racing to catch the tide. These were the careful, dragging steps of sailors and pirates returned from long days and longer nights. Their bodies were tired, but their hearts had not yet remembered how to rest. The lanterns over the door swayed slightly in the breeze, scattering soft circles of light onto the worn threshold, as if the inn itself were smiling in welcome. The door opened with a mild creak, and the first figure stepped inside, bringing with him the salted chill of the evening air. He was a broad-shouldered sailor with a faded blue coat and a scarf wrapped loosely at his neck. His hair smelled of sea spray, and his eyes, though rimmed with fatigue, held a quiet spark. He did not speak at once. He simply stood there, breathing in the warmth, letting the soft light settle around him like a gentle cloak. The innkeeper gave him a small nod, the kind that said more than words. Here you are safe. Here you may be quiet. Then others followed. A pirate with gold hoops in his ears and a scar low on his cheek that no one mentioned, for scars at sea were as common as shells on the shore. A young deckhand with sleeves too long for his arms and boots slightly too big, still new to storms and ropes and the strange language of tides. A woman with a braid dark as wet rope and eyes the color of moss, her coat patched in several places with careful stitches, each patch neat and proud. They came in one by one, the door whispering open and closed, letting in brief breaths of night and then sealing them out again until the room was full of quiet bodies and the soft murmur of greetings. The inn did not demand that anyone be cheerful. There was no loud laughter, no shouting, no clatter of wild celebration. Instead, there was a calm, low hum of voices, like the sound of the sea against a distant shore. The men and women moved toward their familiar places at the tables. The benches worn smooth by years of elbows and mugs and folded hands. They set their burdens down when they entered, heavy sacks, coiled ropes, the invisible weight of memories that clung to their shoulders. In the soft light of the lanterns, that weight seemed to loosen. Their backs straightened slightly, their eyes softened, their hearts remembered that they were more than the storms they had survived. Outside the windows, the harbor shone with a silver tenderness. Moonlight lay upon the water in a long, quiet path, leading from the inn's reflection all the way out to the dark horizon. The ships, with their tall masts and sleeping sails, rocked gently, as though the sea were whispering lullabies to each hull. Ropes creaked now and then, a slow, soothing sound, and the faint clink of metal against wood drifted in on the breeze. The stars were brighter now, scattered across the sky like tiny lanterns. They seemed to lean nearer, as if they, too, wished to sit at a quiet table and warm their light by the inn's fire. The innkeeper moved among his guests with the calm care of someone who understood what it meant to be tired down to the bones. He did not ask for stories. He did not ask where they had been or whether the sea had been kind. He simply placed a hand for a moment on a shoulder or set a mug of warm drink gently in front of rough hands. His presence was like a harbor within a harbor, a still place inside a larger stillness. He knew that, for sailors and pirates both, there were nights when words were too sharp, and silence was the softest bed. As the room filled, the sounds settled into a gentle pattern. The crackle of the fire, the soft thud of boots removed and set aside, the sigh of someone easing down onto a bench after a long watch, the faint rustle of wool and linen as people shifted and made room for one another. From the kitchen came the distant clink of pottery and the warm, comforting scent of bread deepening in the oven, touched with rosemary and salt. Everything moved in a slow, quiet rhythm. Nothing was hurried. Nothing was harsh. In a corner near the hearth, the young deckhand sat with his back against the wall, his eyes half closed. He watched the lantern nearest him, its flame small and steady, held in a cradle of glass. The light painted soft reflections on the wooden table, little pools of gold surrounded by the darker grain. For the first time in many days, he felt that he did not need to be alert to every shout and snap of rope. Here, no one would call him to climb a mast in the dark or to run along a pitching deck while rain stung his face. Here, he needed only to sit, to breathe, to let the warmth sink into his chilled fingers. It felt like a dream he had almost forgotten. Slowly, as the night deepened, boots grew still on the floor, and shoulders loosened as if invisible knots were being undone. Voices dropped lower, not out of fear, but out of a shared wish to keep the peace unbroken. The harbor inn seemed to draw a soft circle of light around itself, a gentle boundary where the troubles of the sea could not cross. Outside that circle, waves rose and fell in the dark, following their timeless dance. Inside, the lamps and lanterns glowed, the fire murmured, and tired souls settled like birds finding safe branches. The innkeeper paused at the doorway and looked out into the harbor one more time. The night was quiet. No more footsteps sounded along the pier. The last trace of sunset had long since faded, and now the world was made of silver water, dark silhouettes, and patient stars. He drew the door closed with slow care, as if tucking a blanket around the room. The lantern above the threshold swayed once in the wind, then steadied, its golden heart shining softly in the dark. Within those walls, among the tables and benches and low ceiling beams, another kind of voyage was beginning. It was not a voyage of roaring waves or distant shores, but a journey inward, into rest, into peace, into the soft drift of dreams. And as the harbor inn settled into its own gentle rhythm, the lanterns of Quiet Harbor burned on, watching over every weary sailor and gentle-hearted pirate who had come for one calm night to live between voyages. The night deepened slowly around the harbor inn, like a soft cloak being drawn more snugly over the shoulders of the world. Outside, the tide breathed in and out against the stones of the pier, its rhythm calm and unhurried, as if the sea itself had grown drowsy. Moonlight slipped across the water in long, silver lines, and the distant creak of wood and rope blended with the quiet sigh of the wind. Inside, the lanterns glowed with a gentle steadiness, and the warm light fell over rough tables and weary faces, smoothing sharp lines and softening tired eyes. It was a night made for simple things, for soft voices and slow breaths, for bread, salt, and peace. From the kitchen came the soothing clatter of preparations, not harsh or hurried, but careful and comforting. The cook of the harbor inn moved among pots and baskets like a patient guardian of small miracles. He was a round, broad man with a beard the color of dry wheat and eyes the color of deep, calm water. His hands were strong, yet his touch was light when it came to kneading dough or sprinkling herbs. He knew the language of food the way sailors knew the language of currents, and he understood that there were nights when the simplest meal, given gently, could feel like a spell against weariness. Steam rose from a great pot of soup, fragrant with onions, carrots, and a handful of dried sea herbs that carried the memory of waves without the harshness of salt. Loaves of bread rested on the counter like small golden hills. Their crusts crackled just enough to promise warmth within. Beside them, a platter of salted fish waited, the silver skin catching the candlelight. The cook's movements were slow and deliberate, as if each slice and stir were part of a quiet, sacred ritual. In the main room, the innkeeper began to set the tables with an easy grace born of long practice. He placed simple wooden bowls at each place, laying them down as though they were little nests meant to hold comfort. Spoons, worn smooth by many hands, followed, their handles faintly shining in the lamplight. He arranged small dishes of coarse sea salt, their grains glimmering like pale sand, and set earthenware jugs of water and mild ale within easy reach. There were no grand decorations, no showy displays, only the calm order of a place where every detail had been quietly considered. The sailors and pirates watched with a kind of softened anticipation. They were used to eating standing up, to swallowing food in haste, while wind tugged at their coats and spray stung their faces. Here, they could sit. Here, they could let their hands rest flat on a table that did not sway and wait for the food to come like a gentle tide. When the cook emerged from the kitchen carrying the first pot, a faint murmur moved through the room, not of impatience, but of gratitude. He walked slowly, carefully, as if he bore more than soup, as if in that fragrant steam there floated a promise of quiet dreams and settled hearts. The innkeeper moved alongside him, steadying the pot with one hand and guiding its journey to the long central table. Once it was set down, the cook began to ladle the soup into waiting bowls. The thick liquid poured in a smooth, comforting stream, releasing more of its warm, earthy scent. The young deckhand watched the rising little swirls of steam as though they were soft, pale ghosts of clouds, drifting up to meet the rafters. His hands trembled slightly from fatigue, but when the innkeeper placed the bowl before him, the weight of it felt solid and kind. Soon the tables were lined with bowls of soup, plates of warm bread, and small piles of salted fish that gleamed softly in the lamplight. The innkeeper nodded once, and people began to eat, not with wild hunger, but with slow, reverent care. Spoons dipped and rose, carrying warmth to cold lips. Bread was torn, not snapped, each piece breaking with a gentle sound that was almost a sigh. Fingers brushed the small dishes of salt, adding just a pinch, then resting again on the table as if they, too, needed to remember how to be still. The room filled with the faint music of quiet eating, the soft clink of spoon against bowl, the low murmur of appreciation, the occasional contented exhale that slipped out before anyone could catch it. As they ate, the sailors and pirates began to talk, but their words were low and unhurried. They did not fling their stories across the table like challenges. They offered them as one might offer a small, precious shell found on a lonely shore. One old sailor with a coat faded to the color of sea mist spoke of a morning when the water had been so calm that it seemed made of glass, reflecting every cloud with perfect clarity. He described how the sun had risen like a gentle, golden coin above the horizon, turning the world into a softly shining dream. A pirate with a scarf tied at his arm smiled and added a memory of sailing under a sky so full of stars that it felt as though the ship were moving through a river of silver lights. He did not speak of battles or danger, only of the way the quiet waves had shone and how the night breeze had smelled of flowers drifting from an unseen island. The woman with the dark braid listened as she ate, her eyes thoughtful. When the others paused, she spoke of a shore where small, pale flowers grew right down to the water's edge, opening only at night when the moon was high. She had walked there once, she told them, when the ship had anchored in a hidden cove for repairs. The sand had been cool beneath her feet, and the blossoms had glowed softly, as if filled with a quiet inner light. As she described them, her voice became almost a whisper, and the others leaned closer to hear, drawn by the softness of the image. Around them, the warm soup and the simple bread turned the memory into something they could almost taste, a moment of stillness, fragrant and peaceful, held like a candle in the dark. The cook moved among them as they spoke, refilling bowls and replacing empty plates with fresh slices of bread. He did not interrupt, but his presence added another layer of comfort to the room, like an extra blanket laid over sleeping shoulders. When he set another piece of bread beside the young deckhand's bowl, he left his hand resting for just a heartbeat on the boy's shoulder, a solid, wordless reassurance. The boy looked up and met the cook's eyes, seeing there a kind of quiet pride. "You have come through another voyage," that gaze seemed to say. "You have come to shore, to warmth, to safety. Eat, rest, dream." As the meal went on, something gentle unfolded around the tables. Where there had been lines of strain upon faces, there now lay softer expressions. Mouths that had been tight with worry eased into small, contented smiles. Eyes that had darted toward every sound grew slower, less guarded. They shared not only food, but also small kindnesses that needed no special words. A piece of bread passed from one hand to another. A jug tilted without being asked. A bowl moved closer to someone too tired to reach. The pirates were no longer hard-eyed and fierce. They were simply people with aching muscles and sore backs, grateful for the simple comfort of being seen and cared for. outside the windows, the harbor watched in its own gentle way. The moon climbed higher, scattering silver across the roofs and the water. The wind, softened by distance, slipped around the corners of the inn and whispered across the glass panes. The ships rocked with quiet patience, their hulls casting dark, slow-moving shadows on the shimmering surface of the sea. Now and then, a faint call of a night bird echoed from the cliffs, and the sound seemed to bless the little inn with a wild, soft music. The world beyond the door might be wide and uncertain, but here, within these walls, there was a tiny, glowing island of certainty. Bread on the table, warmth in the bowl, salt at the fingertips, and kind faces nearby. When at last the bowls were mostly empty and the baskets of bread nearly bare, a new kind of hush settled over the room. It was not the silence of hunger or unease, but the comfortable quiet that comes after a good meal shared among friends. People leaned back against the benches, hands resting loosely on the table or folded in their laps. The fire in the hearth burned low, its flames smaller now but still steady, licking softly at the logs as embers glowed like resting fireflies. The cook gathered the used dishes with a gentle clatter, stacking them with the same care he had shown in setting them out. As he carried them away, he left behind him a trail of lingering warmth and the faint aromas of herbs and sea and smoke. In that softened stillness, the harbor inn seemed to take a deep, peaceful breath. Tired bodies were no longer held tight by hunger, and tired minds were no longer pulled by the harsh edge of the day. The pirates and sailors sat in the gentle light of the lanterns, bellies warm, hearts quieter, thoughts drifting like slow clouds across a calm sky. They were not at sea, and not yet in sleep. They were somewhere in between, resting in the safe harbor of shared bread and simple comforts. And as the night continued, the inn held them all with quiet hands, promising that for a little while longer they could simply be here, together, between waves, between worries, between one voyage and the next. Banda noi. Continue writing the next part. Remember to strictly follow the plot and table of contents. Each part should be about 1,000 words. Write this story in a fairy tale style, ensuring it reads like the work of a skilled writer in a traditional novel format. Maintain a smooth and flowing narrative, avoiding excessive paragraph breaks. Express ideas in well-structured paragraphs, each containing multiple related descriptive sentences. Use detailed descriptions and seamless transitions to connect ideas effectively. Maintain a steady narrative pace, avoiding overly short or disjointed sections. Ensure cohesion between paragraphs, creating a continuous and immersive reading experience akin to a traditional literary novel. Maintain fluency and smoothness throughout. ChatGPT Danoi. Part 3. Patching sails under silver moonlight. When the last crumbs of bread had been brushed from the tables and the bowls had been carried away, the harbor inn settled into an even deeper quiet. The warmth of the meal lingered in the air like a gentle spell, wrapping itself around tired shoulders and drifting into the corners of the room. Some of the sailors and pirates stayed by the hearth, their eyes growing heavy as they watched the embers glow. Others sat in thoughtful silence, fingers tracing slow patterns in the grain of the wood. Outside, the night grew clearer and finer, the sky darkening into a deep velvet blue where the stars shone like patient, watchful eyes. Beyond the back door of the inn lay a small courtyard, edged by a low stone wall, where wildflowers and herbs grew in thin cracks between the rocks. In the daytime, it was a place for barrels, coils of rope, salted nets, and baskets waiting to be mended. At night, however, the courtyard became something different, something softer. Lanterns hung from iron hooks along the wall, and their golden light mingled with the pale silver of the moon, casting gentle shadows across the worn stones. The air there was cool and damp with the scent of the sea, but it also carried the faint perfume of flowering thyme and the sweetness of night-blooming blossoms that opened only under the stars. It was to this quiet place that a handful of sailors and pirates now drifted, moving slowly through the back door, as if answering a call known only to them. Among them was the broad-shouldered pirate with the gold hoops in his ears, his movements slower and more thoughtful now that his hunger was eased. Beside him walked the young deckhand, still small under his too large coat, his eyes alive with a shy curiosity despite the shadows of fatigue beneath them. They stepped out into the courtyard together, the door closing softly behind them, shutting out the murmur of the common room and letting in the cool whisper of the night. On the ground lay a folded bundle of canvas, thick and worn, its edges frayed by wind and salt. When the pirate knelt and shook it open, the sail spread across the stones in a pale, ghostly sheet, catching the moonlight so that it seemed to shine from within. A few other sailors joined them, rolling up their sleeves and settling around the spread canvas with the ease of people returning to a familiar task. Needles and thread were brought out from a wooden chest by the wall, the spools of heavy, waxed line gleaming faintly in the lantern light. It was quiet work, and yet there was a kind of ceremony in the way they prepared, as if patching the sails was not merely a chore, but a calm ritual that belonged to the stillness between voyages. The pirate with the gold hoops glanced toward the young deckhand and gave a small nod. "Come here, lad," he said in a low, gentle voice, the harshness gone from his tone now that the sea's roar was far behind them. "You'll need to learn this, sooner or later. Better to learn it under the moon than in the middle of a storm." The boy came closer, kneeling awkwardly beside the sail, his fingers unsure of where to rest. The canvas smelled of salt and sun and long days in the wind, and his heart beat a little faster at the thought of being trusted with its care. He had seen others mend sails before, their hands moving so quickly that the work seemed like magic. Tonight, for the first time, the magic would be placed in his own hands. The pirate took up a needle as long as the boy's smallest finger, threading it with a length of thick, pale line. Under the light of the lantern, the thread shone like a strip of moonlight made solid. He showed the boy how to knot it firmly, how to test its strength with a gentle tug. The boy watched every movement, his eyes following the path of the thread, the shape of the knot, the way the pirate's fingers curled and loosened. He drank it in a quiet, earnest way, as if the knowledge itself were a kind of food, filling a hunger he had not known how to name. They moved closer to a small tear in the sail, not large enough to be a wound, but not so small that it could be ignored. The edges of the canvas around it frayed like the petals of a spent flower. The pirate laid his hand beside the tear, fingers splayed, and the boy saw how the roughness of skin and the roughness of cloth seemed to belong together, each bearing the marks of wind and weather. "You see," the pirate murmured, "the sea pulls and pulls. It asks much of these sails. If we don't care for them, they give way. But if we mend them with patience, they carry us on and on and on." His words drifted into the night like a simple blessing, rising to meet the silver watchfulness of the stars. He placed the needle in the boy's hand, guiding his fingers to hold it just so. Together, their hands moved to the edge of the tear. The boy felt the cold smoothness of the metal, the steady weight of the pirate's hand resting over his own. He drew in a slow breath, feeling the cool air fill his chest, tasting a faint trace of salt and thyme. Then, under the gentle pressure of the pirate's guidance, he pushed the needle through the canvas. It resisted at first, then yielded, the point slipping into the fabric with a small, satisfying give. When the needle emerged on the other side, the boy let out the breath he had been holding, and a tiny smile flickered across his face. They worked like that, hand over hand, stitch by stitch. The thread pierced the canvas, disappeared, then reappeared, drawing the torn edges closer together in a series of small, even steps. Each stitch was like a heartbeat, steady and unhurried, marking the passage of time in a rhythm older than storms or sails. Around them, the other sailors stitched as well, their hands moving in quiet harmony, creating a soft chorus of thread pulling through cloth. The sound was almost like rain on leaves, or the whisper of waves against a gentle shore. The lanterns above swung slightly in the faint breeze, sending their warm light across the white canvas, across the faces bent over their work, across the little wildflowers that nodded along the courtyard wall. The moon looked down, serene and silent, its silver touch softening every edge. The stars watched, distant yet tender, as if keeping count of the stitches. Even the wind seemed to slow, its voice reduced to a low murmur that made the leaves of the herbs rustle and the flowers tremble. In that small, enclosed space, nature and craft and human care mingled into one single, peaceful act. The young deckhand, guided at first by the pirate's steady hand, soon found his own rhythm. His stitches wobbled a little at the beginning, leaning first one way, then another, like a sailor's steps on a new deck. But they grew more confident with each pass of the needle. The pirate's hand lifted away, leaving the boy to stitch on alone, though he stayed close, watching with a quiet pride. "There you are," he said softly when the boy completed a row. "You're tying the sky back together. One small piece, one small thread. That's all any of us ever do." The boy looked up, his gaze moving from the patched portion of the sail to the arc of the moon above. It seemed true, somehow, that his careful work was not just mending cloth, but repairing something larger and more mysterious. The thought made his heart feel both light and full at once. He bent his head again and continued, the needle flashing briefly each time it caught the lantern light, the thread shining pale and soft, like a line drawn between earth and sky. Every stitch was an answer to the sea's endless pull, a gentle promise that tomorrow, when the ships went out again, the sails would hold. Around the courtyard, the herbs and wildflowers swayed as if in agreement. Their small blossoms, touched by moonlight, glowed faintly, painting the edges of the stones with delicate color. A moth with powdery wings fluttered near one of the lanterns, circling in slow, dreamy loops before settling on the warm metal frame. From somewhere near the harbor wall came the distant, rhythmic splash of water against rock, the sound deep and reassuring. A cool, salty breeze slipped over the top of the inn, threading itself through hair and cloth, carrying away the last sharp traces of the day's labor and leaving behind only a clean, quiet freshness. Time moved gently as they worked, neither rushing nor dragging. The sailors spoke now and then, but their words were few and soft, more like breaths than sentences. They did not tell grand tales or boast of daring feats. Instead, they offered small, simple remarks about the strength of the thread, the feel of the canvas, the way the moon made the harbor look like a bowl of silver. The pirate with the gold hoops hummed under his breath, an old tune without words, its melody swaying like a ship at anchor. The song wove itself into the night air, mingling with the scent of thyme and the faint salt sweetness of the sea. At last, the tear in the sail was closed, the edges drawn together in a neat line of stitches that shone faintly in the light. The boy sat back on his heels and flexed his cramped fingers, a look of quiet wonder on his face. The pirate reached out and ran his hand along the mend, testing it with a firm tug. The canvas held, strong and sure. He gave a small nod of approval. "Good," he said simply. "The wind will be kind to that seam. You've given it something to trust." The boy smiled, and in that smile lay the soft beginnings of a new kind of courage, one not born from facing storms, but from learning to mend what storms had torn. The sail was folded again, carefully this time, the mended section tucked safely within its layers. The sailors rose slowly, brushing dust from their knees, stretching their backs. The lanterns swayed once more, then grew still, their flames steady and calm. Above, the moon had climbed higher, bathing the courtyard in a gentle radiance. The herbs and flowers seemed to bow as the men and boy passed by, their leaves whispering in the light breeze as if offering blessings for the voyages yet to come. As they returned through the back door into the warmth of the inn, the young deckhand glanced back for a moment. He saw the quiet courtyard, the folded sail, the lingering silver of the night. It struck him that this small, silent work beneath the moon was as important as any chart or compass. It was the tender, patient care that made all journeys possible. With that thought resting softly in his heart, he stepped once more into the golden glow of the harbor inn, where rest and dreams waited like safe harbors at the end of a gentle tide. When the last crumbs of bread had been brushed from the tables and the bowls had been carried away, the harbor inn settled into an even deeper quiet. The warmth of the meal lingered in the air like a gentle spell, wrapping itself around tired shoulders and drifting into the corners of the room. Some of the sailors and pirates stayed by the hearth, their eyes growing heavy as they watched the embers glow. Others sat in thoughtful silence, fingers tracing slow patterns in the grain of the wood. Outside, the night grew clearer and finer, the sky darkening into a deep velvet blue where the stars shone like patient, watchful eyes. Beyond the back door of the inn lay a small courtyard, edged by a low stone wall where wildflowers and herbs grew in thin cracks between the rocks. In the daytime, it was a place for barrels, coils of rope, salted nets, and baskets waiting to be mended. At night, however, the courtyard became something different, something softer. Lanterns hung from iron hooks along the wall, and their golden light mingled with the pale silver of the moon, casting gentle shadows across the worn stones. The air there was cool and damp with the scent of the sea, but it also carried the faint perfume of flowering thyme and the sweetness of night-blooming blossoms that opened only under the stars. It was to this quiet place that a handful of sailors and pirates now drifted, moving slowly through the back door as if answering a call known only to them. Among them was the broad-shouldered pirate with the gold hoops in his ears, his movements slower and more thoughtful now that his hunger was eased. Beside him walked the young deckhand, still small under his too large coat, his eyes alive with a shy curiosity despite the shadows of fatigue beneath them. They stepped out into the courtyard together, the door closing softly behind them, shutting out the murmur of the common room and letting in the cool whisper of the night. On the ground lay a folded bundle of canvas, thick and worn, its edges frayed by wind and salt. When the pirate knelt and shook it open, the sail spread across the stones in a pale, ghostly sheet, catching the moonlight so that it seemed to shine from within. A few other sailors joined them, rolling up their sleeves and settling around the spread canvas with the ease of people returning to a familiar task. Needles and thread were brought out from a wooden chest by the wall, the spools of heavy, waxed line gleaming faintly in the lantern light. It was quiet work, and yet there was a kind of ceremony in the way they prepared, as if patching the sails was not merely a chore, but a calm ritual that belonged to the stillness between voyages. The pirate with the gold hoops glanced toward the young deckhand and gave a small nod. "Come here, lad," he said in a low, gentle voice, the harshness gone from his tone now that the sea's roar was far behind them. "You'll need to learn this, sooner or later. Better to learn it under the moon than in the middle of a storm." The boy came closer, kneeling awkwardly beside the sail, his fingers unsure of where to rest. The canvas smelled of salt and sun and long days in the wind, and his heart beat a little faster at the thought of being trusted with its care. He had seen others mend sails before, their hands moving so quickly that the work seemed like magic. Tonight, for the first time, the magic would be placed in his own hands. The pirate took up a needle as long as the boy's smallest finger, threading it with a length of thick, pale line. Under the light of the lantern, the thread shone like a strip of moonlight made solid. He showed the boy how to knot it firmly, how to test its strength with a gentle tug. The boy watched every movement, his eyes following the path of the thread, the shape of the knot, the way the pirate's fingers curled and loosened. He drank it in a quiet, earnest way, as if the knowledge itself were a kind of food, filling a hunger he had not known how to name. They moved closer to a small tear in the sail, not large enough to be a wound, but not so small that it could be ignored. The edges of the canvas around it frayed like the petals of a spent flower. The pirate laid his hand beside the tear, fingers splayed, and the boy saw how the roughness of skin and the roughness of cloth seemed to belong together, each bearing the marks of wind and weather. "You see," the pirate murmured, "the sea pulls and pulls. It asks much of these sails. If we don't care for them, they give way. But if we mend them with patience, they carry us on and on and on." His words drifted into the night like a simple blessing, rising to meet the silver watchfulness of the stars. He placed the needle in the boy's hand, guiding his fingers to hold it just so. Together, their hands moved to the edge of the tear. The boy felt the cold smoothness of the metal, the steady weight of the pirate's hand resting over his own. He drew in a slow breath, feeling the cool air fill his chest, tasting a faint trace of salt and thyme. Then, under the gentle pressure of the pirate's guidance, he pushed the needle through the canvas. It resisted at first, then yielded, the point slipping into the fabric with a small, satisfying give. When the needle emerged on the other side, the boy let out the breath he had been holding, and a tiny smile flickered across his face. They worked like that, hand over hand, stitch by stitch. The thread pierced the canvas, disappeared, then reappeared, drawing the torn edges closer together in a series of small, even steps. Each stitch was like a heartbeat, steady and unhurried, marking the passage of time in a rhythm older than storms or sails. Around them, the other sailors stitched as well, their hands moving in quiet harmony, creating a soft chorus of thread pulling through cloth. The sound was almost like rain on leaves, or the whisper of waves against a gentle shore. The lanterns above swung slightly in the faint breeze, sending their warm light across the white canvas, across the faces bent over their work, across the little wildflowers that nodded along the courtyard wall. The moon looked down, serene and silent, its silver touch softening every edge. The stars watched, distant yet tender, as if keeping count of the stitches. Even the wind seemed to slow, its voice reduced to a low murmur that made the leaves of the herbs rustle and the flowers tremble. In that small, enclosed space, nature and craft and human care mingled into one single, peaceful act. The young deckhand, guided at first by the pirate's steady hand, soon found his own rhythm. His stitches wobbled a little at the beginning, leaning first one way, then another, like a sailor's steps on a new deck, but they grew more confident with each pass of the needle. The pirate's hand lifted away, leaving the boy to stitch on alone, though he stayed close, watching with a quiet pride. "There you are," he said softly when the boy completed a row. "You're tying the sky back together. One small piece, one small thread. That's all any of us ever do." The boy looked up, his gaze moving from the patched portion of the sail to the arc of the moon above. It seemed true, somehow, that his careful work was not just mending cloth, but repairing something larger and more mysterious. The thought made his heart feel both light and full at once. He bent his head again and continued, the needle flashing briefly each time it caught the lantern light, the thread shining pale and soft, like a line drawn between earth and sky. Every stitch was an answer to the sea's endless pull, a gentle promise that tomorrow, when the ships went out again, the sails would hold. Around the courtyard, the herbs and wildflowers swayed as if in agreement. Their small blossoms, touched by moonlight, glowed faintly, painting the edges of the stones with delicate color. A moth with powdery wings fluttered near one of the lanterns, circling in slow, dreamy loops before settling on the warm metal frame. From somewhere near the harbor wall came the distant, rhythmic splash of water against rock, the sound deep and reassuring. A cool, salty breeze slipped over the top of the inn, threading itself through hair and cloth, carrying away the last sharp traces of the day's labor, and leaving behind only a clean, quiet freshness. Time moved gently as they worked, neither rushing nor dragging. The sailors spoke now and then, but their words were few and soft, more like breaths than sentences. They did not tell grand tales or boast of daring feats. Instead, they offered small, simple remarks about the strength of the thread, the feel of the canvas, the way the moon made the harbor look like a bowl of silver. The pirate with the gold hoops hummed under his breath, an old tune without words, its melody swaying like a ship at anchor. The song wove itself into the night air, mingling with the scent of thyme and the faint salt sweetness of the sea. At last, the tier in the sail was closed, the edges drawn together in a neat line of stitches that shone faintly in the light. The boy sat back on his heels and flexed his cramped fingers, a look of quiet wonder on his face. The pirate reached out and ran his hand along the mend, testing it with a firm tug. The canvas held, strong and sure. He gave a small nod of approval. "Good," he said simply. "The wind will be kind to that seam. You've given it something to trust." The boy smiled, and in that smile lay the soft beginnings of a new kind of courage, one not born from facing storms, but from learning to mend what storms had torn. The sail was folded again, carefully this time, the mended section tucked safely within its layers. The sailors rose slowly, brushing dust from their knees, stretching their backs. The lanterns swayed once more, then grew still, their flames steady and calm. Above, the moon had climbed higher, bathing the courtyard in a gentle radiance. The herbs and flowers seemed to bow as the men and boy passed by, their leaves whispering in the light breeze as if offering blessings for the voyages yet to come. As they returned through the back door into the warmth of the inn, the young deckhand glanced back for a moment. He saw the quiet courtyard, the folded sail, the lingering silver of the night. It struck him that this small, silent work beneath the moon was as important as any chart or compass. It was the tender, patient care that made all journeys possible. With that thought resting softly in his heart, he stepped once more into the golden glow of the harbor inn, where rest and dreams waited like safe harbors at the end of a gentle tide. The harbor inn had grown quieter still by the time the patched sail was folded and carried away to its resting place. The warmth of the common room felt deeper now, as if the fire and lanterns understood that night had settled fully over the harbor, and that their gentle duty was to keep it at bay. The scent of bread and herbs lingered in the air like a soft memory, mingling with the faint tang of salt that slipped in whenever the door opened. Voices had dropped to murmurs, then to almost silence, until the only sounds were the low crackle of flame, the creak of old wood, and the slow, peaceful breathing of people who were finally beginning to unwind. It was in this softened hour, when the world outside seemed wrapped in silver shadows, that the healer of the harbor inn rose from her small room above and began her quiet descent. Her name was Mira, though most simply called her the healer in tones of gentle respect. She moved down the narrow wooden stairs with the lightness of someone who had walked that path so many times that her feet knew every creak, every hollow, every knot in the boards. Her dress was made of soft, sea-colored cloth that brushed her ankles with a whisper, and over it she wore an apron, the shade of dried lavender. Her hair, threaded with a few silvery strands that caught the lamplight, was tied back with a ribbon the color of dusk. Crossing her arms, she held bundles of dried flowers, leaves, and roots, their shapes and scents familiar companions. Their fragrance preceded her, slipping into the room like a quiet breeze from some wild, green hillside where the wind was always mild and kind. The innkeeper looked up as she came into view and gave her a small, grateful nod. He did not need to call for her. She always seemed to know when the sailors' weariness had sunk from their shoulders into their bones, when food and warmth alone were not enough. She answered not words, but the deep, wordless sigh that rose from tired bodies when the day was done. She crossed the room without haste, her steps soft upon the floor, and the bundles in her arms rustled gently, their dry leaves whispering against one another like sleepy voices. Those nearest to her shifted a little, not away from her, but toward her, drawn by the promise of rest that clung to her like a soft cloak. At one end of the room, near the hearth, stood a sturdy table that had been cleared of bowls and plates. The innkeeper had placed a broad metal basin upon it, filled with warm water that sent up pale ribbons of steam. The surface of the water trembled faintly, reflecting wavering shapes of firelight and lantern glow, like a tiny, quiet sea, safe within its rim. Mira set down her bundles beside the basin and began to untie them, her fingers moving with the slow, sure grace of long practice. She chose sprigs of chamomile with their small, sleepy blossoms, loops of dried sea lavender, faded to a gentle grayish purple that still held the memory of coastal breezes, leaves of lemon balm, and a pinch of crushed rosemary. One by one, she added them to the water, where they drifted and turned, releasing their soothing scents as they softened and sank. The fragrance spread through the room, subtle but insistent, weaving itself into the air. Chamomile brought a mellow sweetness, lemon balm a light, bright note, and sea lavender a mysterious hint of the shore at dawn. The sailors lifted their heads to breathe it in, and something in their faces eased. Their hands, resting on the table or curled around mugs, seemed suddenly to remember how much they ached. The cracked skin, the stretched tendons, the scars from rope and salt and long, gripping hours at the wheel. Mira understood that moment very well, when weariness finally rose into full awareness. She knew how to meet it gently, like a friend. "Who will be first?" she asked softly, her voice low and clear, carried not by force but by its calmness. It flowed through the room like a small, steady stream, softening the edges of silence. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then the broad-shouldered pirate, with the gold hoops in his ears, stepped forward, a faint, wry smile touching his lips. He had led the boy in stitching the sail. Now he approached this new kind of mending with the same quiet bravery. He rolled up his sleeves, revealing forearms latticed with pale lines and old marks, the stories of rough work written in his skin. Mira gestured for him to sit on the bench beside the table. He did so, watching as she dipped her hands into the warm water, stirring the floating herbs until the scent rose in a thicker wave. Then she lifted one of his hands in both of hers and guided it gently into the basin. The pirate breathed out slowly as the warmth wrapped around his bruised knuckles and stiff fingers. His hand looked strangely vulnerable in that soft, scented water. Not the hand of someone who gripped ropes and oars and blades, but simply the hand of a weary human being longing for rest. She worked in silence for a time, letting the heat seep into his joints, letting the herbs do their quiet work. Then, with a cloth dipped in the fragrant water, she began to bathe his hand, wiping away salt, dust, and the lingering grit of the day. Her touch was feather-light, never forcing, never rushing. To each finger, she gave its own moment of attention, kneading gently at the base, pressing softly along the tendons, smoothing the skin with a careful, circling motion. The pirate's shoulders, which had long been set as if braced against an unseen wind, slowly sank. His eyes, once sharp and quick, half closed as the pain in his fingers unwound itself, thread by thread. Around the room, others watched with a quiet fascination. They had seen Mira's work before, after storms and long crossings, after lines had burned palms and cold had clenched muscles into knots. They knew that her hands carried a kind of magic, not the loud, blazing magic of legends, but a quiet magic born from patience, herbs, and the simple, tender belief that every wound deserved gentle care. Tonight, in the soft glow of the inn's lanterns and the peaceful murmur of burning logs, that magic seemed even stronger, as if the listening stars above had poured a little extra silver blessing into her bowls and bundles. Once the pirate's first hand had been soaked and bathed, she patted it dry with a cloth and reached for a small jar. Inside, a salve of beeswax, seaweed oil, and crushed petals gleamed pale under the lamplight. It smelled of honey, salt, and something green and fresh. With 2 fingers, she scooped a little of the balm and warmed it between her palms. Then she massaged it into each knuckle, each scar, each calloused stretch of skin, working slowly until the hand shone faintly with a gentle sheen. The pirate flexed his fingers, and a look of quiet surprise crossed his face. The ache had not vanished entirely, but it had softened, like waves losing their sharpness at the edge of a beach. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice low and husky. Mira only nodded, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "Hands remember kindness," she said quietly. "They carry it with them, even into storms." The words settled over the room like fine, warm sand, filling tiny, unseen gaps inside the listeners' hearts. One by one, they found their way into the quiet spaces of memory, where they would rest and glow when the next hard day came. Next came the woman with the dark braid, her eyes shadowed but steady. Mira tended her hands with the same gentle ceremony, noticing the places where rope had bitten deeper, where cold had left its pale traces. She did not ask how each mark had been made. She did not need to know whether it came from a rough sea or a long night at the helm. To her, every mark was simply a story of endurance, and her only task was to bring comfort to the place where endurance had turned into pain. As she worked, the woman's gaze drifted to the window, where the night's darkness lay like a soft blanket, stitched with stars. By the time both hands were wrapped briefly in warm cloths, soaked with herb-scented water, her features had smoothed, the tightness around her mouth easing into a faint, peaceful curve. The young deckhand watched all this from his seat near the hearth, his own hands tucked into his sleeves as if hiding. He was unused to being cared for. His life at sea had been a series of commands, tasks, and tests, with little room for softness. Yet, as he saw the pirate's fingers flex more easily and the woman's shoulders relax, he felt his own palms tingle with a sudden, almost shy awareness of their soreness. The tiny cuts, the rope burns, the stiffness from stitched sails and hauled lines sang out softly, like a distant chorus at the edge of his mind. Mira's eyes found him at last, as if she had been aware of him all along. "Come," she said gently, lifting one hand in invitation. The smallest hands work the hardest to keep up. Let them rest a little. The boy hesitated only a moment before slipping from his bench and crossing the room. He sat where the pirate had sat, feeling the warmth of the place still lingering on the wood. When Mira took his hands in hers, he started a little at the difference. Her palms were warm and smooth, her grip light yet sure. She guided his hands into the basin, and as the scented water closed over his fingers, he let out a breath he had not known he was holding. It felt as though every tight muscle in his arms heard that breath and answered it, loosening just a little. She bathed his hands as she had the others, but with an extra tenderness that came from knowing how young he was, how new to the long, rough dance of ship and wave. She cleaned each small cut with slow care, as if erasing traces of sharp wind and harsh rope. She massaged the faint bruises at his wrists and palms, coaxing warmth back into places that had grown used to cold strain. The boy's eyes grew heavy as she worked, the lamplight turning to halos and soft blurs at the edge of his vision. The scent of chamomile and sea lavender curled around him like a reassuring arm. When she dried his hands and smoothed the salve into his skin, he felt an almost dreamy lightness in his fingers, as if they had become both softer and stronger at once. He flexed them under the glow of the lantern and saw that, for a moment, they did not look like tools or instruments or anchors. They looked like his hands, simple and human, capable of holding a mug, threading a needle, or sheltering a small, sleeping bird. "There," Mira said in her soft, rhythmic voice. "You will work again, but tonight your hands may simply belong to you." One by one, others came forward, each bringing a different story marked into their skin. Mira met them all with the same quiet patience. She did not grow hurried, even as the night grew later and the fire sank lower. The room seemed to bend time around her, stretching moments so that every pair of hands found a place in the warm basin. Every ache found a touch of balm. Outside, the harbor lay in deep, peaceful darkness. The ships slept. The water glowed faintly under the moon. The wind hummed a low, gentle song along the masts. At last, when the final pair of hands had been tended and the last cloth hung to dry, Mira gathered her herbs in jars once more. The basin was emptied, the water carrying away tiny traces of salt, sweat, and fatigue, as if the night itself had agreed to take them. The inn now held a new kind of silence, rich and full, like the hush in a chapel after a simple, heartfelt prayer. Hands rested loosely in laps or on tabletops, no longer clenched or braced. Faces loosened into expressions of quiet peace. Mira climbed the stairs again, her feet light on the worn steps, her work done for the night. As she disappeared into the soft darkness above, the harbor inn seemed to sigh, its beams settling, its shadows deepening into calm. Below, by the fire and under the lanterns, the sailors and pirates sat with their newly soothed hands, feeling a gentle, protective warmth seep through them, as if the herbs and water and touch had woven a soft shield between them and tomorrow's storms. In that tender, silver-lit hour, they belonged completely to the quiet, to their dreams, and to the deep, peaceful rest that was slowly gathering around them like a friendly tide. By the time Mira's herbs had worked their quiet magic and the last pair of tired hands had been soothed, the night outside the harbor inn had grown deep and velvety. The harbor lay under a sky freckled with stars, each small light steady and patient, as if it, too, were content to watch over resting ships and drowsy streets. The moon, higher now, poured a soft silver over the water turning every ripple into a gentle, shifting thread of light. The wind had calmed to a mild, even breath that brushed the masts and rigging with affectionate fingers, making them murmur and creak in a slow, sleepy rhythm. It was the kind of night when stories seem to float naturally to the surface of the mind, rising like shells revealed by a retreating tide. Inside, the inn had settled into a hush that was not quite silence. The tables had been cleared and wiped, the bowls stacked, the floor swept with unhurried strokes. The fire in the hearth had burned down to a bed of embers, but those embers glowed with a steady, comforting warmth, their light as gentle as a heartbeat. Lanterns still hung from the beams, their flames calmer now, their glow turned softer and more golden as oil burned low. The air was full of layered scents, faint smoke, herbs, salt, wool warmed by bodies, and the ghost of bread and soup that lingered like a happy memory. The sailors and pirates, no longer sharp with hunger or stiff with pain, had drawn closer to the hearth. Benches and stools pulled into a loose circle that felt neither formal nor careless, but simply right. The young deckhand sat near the front of that circle, his back against one of the heavy wooden chair legs, his newly soothed hands curled around a mug of warm, mild drink. The heat seeped into his fingers and palms, comforting and steady. His eyes were large and dark in the firelight, reflecting the red-gold glow like still pools reflecting stars. Though his body was tired, his mind hovered in that clear, gentle place between wakefulness and dreams, where every image is sharper, every word more luminous. He sensed that something important in its own small way was about to happen, something that would not roar or shout, but would settle into his heart like a quiet, enduring star. The innkeeper, standing for a moment by the hearth, took in the sight of his gathered guests. He saw the broad-shouldered pirate with the gold hoops in his ears, now leaning with his elbows on his knees, his expression softened. He saw the woman with the dark braid sitting straight but relaxed, her hands folded, her gaze attentive and calm. He noticed other faces, older and younger, rough and smooth, all drawn by the same invisible thread of weariness and wonder. He knew their lives were full of noise and sharpness when they were at sea, but here in his inn, there was room for other things: quiet stories, soft laughter, shared dreams of places where the world was kind. "Tell them," said the woman with the dark braid, her voice low and musical, directed toward the pirate beside her. "Tell one of the gentle ones tonight. We've had enough of hard tales." The pirate's mouth curved in a small smile. His stories, when told outside the inn, were often filled with wild winds and narrow escapes, told with loud gestures and laughter that shook the table. But he understood the harbor's rule. This was a place for the softer side of the sea. He nodded, his earrings gleaming faintly in the lamplight as they swung. "All right," he said, his deep voice dropping to a tone that matched the embers low, steady, and warm. "No battles, no storms with teeth, only the quiet side of faraway shores." He glanced at the young deckhand, whose eyes brightened with expectancy. Sit close, lad. Stories run gentler when someone truly listens. The boy shifted slightly closer, though he was already quite near, and wrapped his fingers more firmly around his mug. The room seemed to lean toward the pirate. Even the beams and the chairs, even the shadows, as if the whole inn were eager to hear. Outside, the tide gave a long, soft sigh against the stones, like a signal to begin. Once, the pirate began. We sailed for many days across a sea that seemed to have forgotten how to grow rough. The waves were small and regular, like breathing. The wind was kind. The sky was wide and blue by day, and at night it became a dark bowl full of stars, turned gently over the ship. We had no hurry, and the sea seemed in no hurry to let us go. One evening, just as the sun was slipping into the water like a slowly sinking coin of gold, something magical began to happen. He paused, letting the silence stretch just a little, not to build suspense, but to let the listeners' minds open like shells. The fire crackled softly. Someone shifted on the bench, and cloth rustled quietly. The boy's heartbeat, though, seemed to grow louder in his own ears. The water around us began to glow. The pirate continued, his voice dropping into a tone of soft wonder. At first, it was only a faint shimmer, like dusting very fine silver powder over a dark cloth. Then, as the ship moved, the glow deepened. The wake behind us shone like a trail of stars, and every small wave that touched the hull lit up with pale blue-green light. We realized that the sea was filled with tiny living lights, little creatures that turned their bodies into lanterns whenever we brushed past them. It was as if the ocean had decided, just for that night, to show us its own quiet festival. The young deckhand could almost see it, the ship moving through dark water that suddenly became a pathway of soft flame. He pictured the glowing wake unrolling behind them, reaching back toward the horizon like a slow, shining ribbon. He imagined leaning over the rail, his newly healed hands gripping the wood and watching the ship's hull cut through living silver. In his mind, he dipped his fingers into that water and watched small sparks bloom around them like underwater stars. "We were careful," the pirate said gently, "not to shout, not to break the spell." We moved lightly on the deck. We spoke in whispers. We turned our lanterns low, because the sea's lanterns were brighter, and we did not wish to argue with such beauty. As the night deepened, glowing fish swam beside us, leaving streaks of light behind them. Dolphins came up to play in the glow, their bodies traced in pale blue as they leapt and dipped. It was as if the sea had drawn lines of light around every moving thing, so we could see how gently the world danced around us. A soft murmur of appreciation moved through the listeners, like a wave running along the shore. No one applauded. Their hands remained still, their hearts doing the listening. The woman with the dark braid closed her eyes briefly, as if she too remembered a night when the ocean had worn luminous jewels and shared them only with those who sailed in silence. The young deckhand felt a slow, deep peace seep into him through the imagined glow, as though those tiny, shining creatures had lit small lanterns in his chest. That was one shoreless night the pirate said. "A night of water and light alone. But there are shores that are kind, too. Once, we came upon an island that did not wish to frighten or dazzle. It only wished to rest and be beautiful in a quiet way." He turned his head slightly toward the woman, inviting her in. She opened her eyes and smiled, her gaze soft as moonlight. "You mean the island of the singing sand?" she said. "Let me tell that one." The pirate nodded and leaned back, ceding the center of the circle to her gentle voice. "It lies far from here," she began, "in a place where the sea is very clear and very calm, and the sky seems to like reflecting itself in the water. From afar, the island looks unremarkable, just a low line of pale shore, a few rocky teeth, and green hills behind. But as you approach, you begin to hear it. Not loudly, no. It is more like a humming, a soft, trembling sound that seems to rise from the beach itself whenever the wind passes over it. We did not understand at first. We thought it was some trick of the breeze in the grasses, but then we stepped onto the sand. Her hands, resting in her lap, moved slightly as she spoke, fingertips brushing together as if feeling the grains again. With every footstep, the sand answered, she said, not with a crunch or a whisper, but with a note, a small, clear, bell-like note. It was as if we were walking across an instrument made of countless tiny crystals. Each step awakened a different strand of sound. If we walked slowly, the melody was gentle and low. If we hurried, it rose and shimmered around us. We tried not to laugh too loudly, not to disturb it. Some of the crew began to move in careful patterns, tracing loops and lines, just to see what kind of music the sand would give. It was simple, and yet it felt like a gift. The boy pictured it, a soft shore of pale, singing sand, glowing faintly under the sun, and later under the stars. He imagined walking there at dusk, leaving a trail of music behind him, each note fading into the next like ripples on water. He could almost feel the coolness of it beneath his bare feet, the grains sliding and chime soft beneath his steps. The thought made his heart ache with a gentle, sweet longing for places he had never seen and might never see, and yet which, through these stories, felt close as the next room. As night fell on that island, the woman went on. The wind softened, and the songs of the sand grew quieter, as if the ground itself were growing sleepy. We lay on our backs and looked up at the sky. It was full of stars, so many that it seemed the entire heavens were made of silver dust. Each star felt like a little eye, kind and watchful. We spoke little. We had no need. The sand, the stars, the warm, mild air, they told us that sometimes the world wants nothing from us. It only asks that we lie still, listen, and rest. Her voice drifted into silence, but it was a rich, satisfied silence, like the pause after a kind word or a gentle song. The fire in the hearth sighed and shifted, sending up a small flurry of sparks that rose and vanished, like tiny wishes carried into the dim rafters. Outside, a wave lapped the shore with a soft, regular sound, as if imitating the story's measured rhythm. The innkeeper, still standing near the hearth, let his gaze travel from face to face. He saw that the stories had done their work. The lines of worry were softer, the eyes more distant and dreamy. The room felt as if it were filled with those faraway places, the glowing sea, the singing sands, the star-laced sky. Though the sailors and pirates were sitting on wooden benches and stools, they were also, in a quiet, secret way, walking the shores of other worlds, where the sea was gentle and the wind sang lullabies. "Tell one more," the young deckhand whispered before he could stop himself, his voice shy but hopeful. The pirate and the woman shared a small smile. "Just a small one," the pirate said, inclining his head. "About the companions we sometimes have at sea when the world is in a tender mood." He folded his hands loosely, letting his gaze rest on the boy. "On calm nights, when the water is like dark glass and the ship glides rather than cuts, we sometimes see shapes beneath the surface, great, shadowy shapes, moving with us, never coming too close, never fading away entirely. Whales, perhaps, or other gentle giants. We do not know. They travel beside us, surfacing now and then to breathe, sending up soft plumes of mist that shine silver in the moonlight. They do not speak, yet they feel like guardians, like quiet, patient guides. When they are there, the sea feels safer, less empty. Their presence tells us, without words, that we are not alone. The boy's eyes grew moist at the thought of these silent companions, moving in the deep, just out of reach, yet faithful in their calm watchfulness. He thought of the inn, too, as a kind of guardian, a place that traveled with all of them in memory, even when they were far from its warm light. And he felt, with a sudden, gentle certainty, that somewhere within the great, breathing world, there would always be soft shores, glowing seas, singing sands, and watchful giants. The pirate's voice faded into the quiet, like a tide slipping softly down the beach. No one hurried to fill the space he left. They let the silence settle around them, heavy and tender, like a warm blanket. Outside, the silver path of moonlight stretched across the harbor, and the stars watched with unblinking patience. Inside, the harbor inn glowed softly, holding its small circle of dreamers close. In that peaceful hour, the stories of faraway shores did what they had been meant to do. They did not excite or frighten or stir restless longing. Instead, they brought the wide, gentle world closer until each listener felt wrapped in its quiet beauty. Little by little, shoulders drooped, heads nodded, and eyes slid shut, carrying glowing seas and singing sands with them into sleep. The night deepened, and the harbor inn, still and silver-lit, stood watch over them all, as calm and kind as any guardian of the faraway, peaceful places it had brought into its own quiet heart. Sometime after the last story of glowing seas and singing sands had drifted into the rafters, the night outside the harbor inn began to change. It did not happen all at once. It came gently, in slow, quiet shifts, the the way a deep breath is drawn without sound. Far beyond the curve of the bay, past the headland that cradled the little town, clouds were gathering over the open sea. They rose like soft, dark mountains, brushed with faint silver where the moonlight caught their edges. The stars around them faded slightly, not from fear, but as if making room for a different kind of light to come. The wind, which had been only a mild, steady breath against the masts, turned cooler and more thoughtful, carrying with it a scent of rain that had not yet fallen. Within the harbor, however, the water remained calm. The anchored ships rocked in a slow, nearly imperceptible motion, their hulls swaying in time with the tide's gentle in and out. The ropes creaked softly, and the wooden posts along the pier stood firm, wrapped in damp seaweed and shadow. Lanterns on the decks of a few vessels still burned, small islands of gold in the blue stillness. But their flames were steady, not whipped or twisted by any sudden gust. It was as if the harbor, sheltered by its stone arms and watched over by the sleeping town, had decided to hold its breath, to remain still and peaceful while the distant sky prepared to speak. Inside the harbor inn, the quiet circle around the hearth had thinned. A few of the older sailors had gone to their beds, climbing the stairs with slow, even steps, the floorboards creaking softly beneath their weight. The cook had retreated to the kitchen, where he moved about like a gentle shadow, tidying pots and setting aside loaves for the morning. Only a handful of guests remained in the common room. The innkeeper, polishing the last of the mugs with a cloth as soft as shore fog. The broad-shouldered pirate, sitting with his back to the wall and his eyes half closed. The woman with the dark braid, her arms loosely folded, and the young deckhand who lingered in that sweet, floating space between wakefulness and sleep, reluctant to let go of the night's calm. It was the pirate who first noticed the distant flicker against the window panes. His gaze shifted from the embers to the glass, where the faintest breath of light passed like a pale ghost. Then, a heartbeat later, it came again. A soft, distant flash, too gentle to startle, too far away to frighten. It painted the underside of the clouds with a momentary glow, like silver ink brushed across dark velvet, and then it faded, leaving the glass once more a mirror for the lanterns and the quiet room. The pirate's eyebrow rose slightly, not in alarm, but in recognition, as one sailor greeting another across a stretch of water. "Storm far out," he murmured, his voice low and calm. "Beyond the headland, the sea is talking to itself tonight." His words drifted through the room like a feather on still air, touching the ears of those present and settling there without weight. The young deckhand looked toward the window, his curiosity gathering again, gentle and wide-eyed. He did not know whether storms were kinder to watch from land than from sea, but he suspected, from the serene faces around him, that on such a night they could be. The innkeeper set down the last mug and walked quietly to the window, wiping his hands on his apron. He drew a bit closer to the glass, not leaning, but standing with the straight, steady posture of someone who knew that the harbor's moods were not to be taken lightly, even in peace. Another distant flash bloomed along the horizon, and he watched the play of silver across the dark clouds. The lightning was too far to be sharp. It spread softly, like the unfurling of a luminous veil, then sank back into shadow. No thunder reached them, only the faintest suggestion of a rumble, as distant as a dream half remembered. The harbor, cradled between stone arms, remained quiet, its reflections unbroken. The young deckhand slipped from his seat and came to stand beside the innkeeper. He pressed his small hand against the glass, feeling the coolness of it, the slight trembling where the wind brushed against the panes. Outside, the night looked gentle and mysterious, filled with silver paths and sleeping ships. It was strange to think that, beyond that protective curve of land, the sky was stirring itself into a storm. Yet from here, it felt as far away as an old story told in a soft voice. "Is it dangerous?" the boy asked, his whisper hardly louder than the crackle of the embers. He did not sound afraid, only wanting to understand how the world could be restless in one place and so calm in another. The innkeeper shook his head slowly. "Not for us tonight," he replied. "The headland and the harbor will hold it back. We will have only its light to keep us company. Sometimes the sea likes to remind us of its power, even when it does not mean us harm." He rested one hand lightly on the boy's shoulder, a quiet weight that felt like an anchor, steady and kind. Another flash came, a little broader this time, spreading behind the clouds like a soft sigh of luminosity. For a moment, the entire horizon at the harbor's mouth was rimmed in pale silver, and the tops of the waves beyond it flickered like a field of fallen stars. Then the light folded back into darkness, and the moon resumed its gentle rule over the sheltered water. The ships remained still. The wind stroked their lines with careful fingers. The harbor inn, with its stout walls and warm lights, felt like a small, safe island in a world that could change its face at any time. The woman with the dark braid rose from her bench and joined them at the window. She did not speak, she simply stood, her hands resting loosely at her sides, watching the far-off storm paint and erase its silver calligraphy on the clouds. She had spent nights at sea when such light meant tension, quick orders, and the tightening of ropes. Tonight, though, she saw it from the other side, the peaceful side, the side where a roof, four walls, and the forgiving embrace of a quiet harbor stood between her and the sky's brief wildness. The difference was like the difference between standing in the rain and watching it fall from a sheltered doorway, the drops beautiful instead of cold. From the courtyard behind the inn, the faint fragrance of flowers drifted in, carried on a thin breath of air that found its way through the cracks around the door. The herbs and night-blooming blossoms that grew among the stones felt the coming change in the sky, but did not tremble. Their roots were deep in their small patch of earth. They were used to watching storms pass, some near, some far. Tonight, they opened their petals to the faint promise of rain and let the distant flashes wash them in momentary silver, like blessings from a sky that would not quite arrive. Slowly, the group at the window returned to their seats, though their eyes lingered for a moment on the glass. There was something soothing in knowing that the world was vast and alive, that it could flash and rumble, and yet still choose to be gentle where they were. It made the inn feel all the more like a cradle, held in the careful hands of headland, harbor, and sky. As they sat again by the hearth, the distant flashes continued their calm dance at the edge of sight, each one a reminder that there was a line between danger and peace, and for this night, their feet were firmly planted on the soft side of it. The pirate began to hum, very quietly, a slow, rocking tune without words, more feeling than song. It matched the faint movement of the ships outside and the deep, almost unnoticeable sway of the inn itself as the wind brushed against its walls. The boy listened, his eyes growing heavy again, the notes wrapping around him like a familiar blanket. The woman added a second hum, a higher strand of sound, weaving in and out of the pirate's melody like a thread of silver through dark cloth. The innkeeper, listening, closed his eyes for a moment, allowing himself the comfort of being surrounded by these low, human voices and the far-off murmur of the sky. No one spoke of danger. No one told tales of ships lost or storms survived. Those stories belonged to other nights, other moods. On this night, the storm was only a distant lantern behind the clouds, and the harbor's breath was slow and deep. The fire sank further, embers shifting and settling, casting soft, red glows that pulsed in a rhythm as gentle as a sleeping heart. Lanterns flickered slightly as the oil thinned, but they did not falter. Their light, too, seemed to hum along with the unspoken song, joining the quiet chorus of wind, water, and wood. As the night wore on, the distant lightning grew less frequent, as though the storm, having spoken its piece somewhere over the open sea, now wished to rest. The clouds softened, their edges losing their sharpness, and the stars gradually returned to their proper places between them. The faint scent of rain lingered, but only a few drops reached the harbor, falling like a sparse, gentle blessing on roofs, decks, and flowers. They tapped lightly on the inn's windows, leaving tiny trails that caught what remained of the moonlight. The world seemed to sigh, the harbor releasing the breath it had held, content that the night's small trial had passed it by. The young deckhand, at last, could no longer keep his eyes open. His head nodded once, twice, then came to rest against the back of the chair, his hands still wrapped loosely around the now cool mug. The innkeeper laid a soft, woolen blanket over his shoulders, careful not to wake him, and the boy's breathing deepened, matching the slow, peaceful rhythm of the tide. The pirate's humming faded into silence, and the woman with the dark braid folded her arms on the table, resting her head there for a moment, as if listening to the last whispers of the storm beyond the headland. In that gentle, silver-shadowed hour, the harbor inn became utterly still. The storm outside, once a distant flicker, was now only a memory of light on clouds. The harbor, having held its breath through the sky's quiet spectacle, now breathed smoothly again, its water calm as a sleeping face. Within the inn's walls, pirates, sailors, healers, and keepers all lay wrapped in their own small circles of warmth, their dreams free to wander through glowing seas and singing sands, through peaceful storms, watched from safe harbors, through nights where the world chose kindness over chaos, and the harbor inn, like a great, kind heart at the edge of the water, kept watch in the deep, soft darkness, cradling them all in its gentle, protective hush. When the last pale flashes of the distant storm had faded beyond the headland, the harbor inn seemed to draw the night closer around itself like a soft, dark cloak. The windows reflected only the dim glow of the lanterns now, and the harbor outside lay quiet and silver, its waters folding and unfolding with small, peaceful breaths. Within the inn, most of the candles had been pinched out, leaving the hall lit only by a few low lamps and the banked embers in the hearth. Their light pooled in gentle circles upon the worn floorboards and across the tabletops, leaving the corners full of kindly shadow. It was an hour when voices, if they rose too sharply, would feel like pebbles thrown into a still pond. Yet no one wished to throw anything. They wished only to float, to drift, to sink slowly toward sleep in that warm, hushed sea of quiet. The young deckhand had roused from his doze when the blanket was laid over his shoulders, then slipped back into that tender state where the mind listens even as the body rests. Around him, a few sailors still sat with mugs between their hands, not drinking now, merely holding on to the fading warmth as if it were a small, gentle anchor. The broad-shouldered pirate leaned against the wall, his chin lowered, his eyes half shut, the lines on his face softened by the lamplight. The woman with the dark braid had straightened again, no longer resting on her folded arms, but sitting with her hands loosely clasped, eyes wandering from ember to lantern to window, as if counting, in a slow and secret way, all the sources of light that kept the night so gentle. The innkeeper stood by the hearth, one hand resting on the mantel, as if he were listening to something that was not quite sound. It was then that an old, weather-worn fiddle case appeared, carried in the hand of a sailor whose hair had turned the silver gray of early morning clouds. He had sat quietly throughout the evening, saying little, smiling now and then at a story, his presence a calm rock among the others' gentle waves. Now he set the case upon the table with the utmost care, as though it held something living and delicate. When he opened the latches, the faintest scent of resin drifted up, mingling with the smoke and herbs, and the polished wood inside caught the low light, a small crescent of warm honey gleam in the shadows. The room seemed to notice this new presence without surprise, as though it had been waiting patiently for the moment when music would decide to step out of its silence. The sailor lifted the fiddle with hands that had tied countless knots and gripped countless ropes, yet held this instrument as if it were a sleeping bird. He took up the bow, ran his thumb along the worn place where it always rested, and then looked around the circle. "No wild jigs," he said softly, his smile gentle and knowing. "Only the kind that rock a ship to sleep." A murmur of quiet approval passed through the room, more felt than heard. The innkeeper nodded once. The boy, wide-eyed, pulled the blanket a little closer around himself, sensing that something very soft and very important was about to begin. The first note was so low and tender that it almost seemed to grow out of the crackle of the embers. It trembled for a heartbeat in the air, then lengthened, smoothing itself into a slow, curving line of sound that slipped through the hall like a warm, silver ribbon. The sailor's bow moved with unhurried grace across the strings, coaxing out a melody that rose and fell in gentle waves. It was not a song of heroics or high spirits. It was a lullaby for tired wood and worn sails, for shoulders that had carried too much weight, for eyes that had stared too long at harsh horizons. Each note settled lightly onto the listeners' hearts, like soft petals falling onto still water. As the melody unfolded, the room changed in a quiet, invisible way. The corners seemed less shadowed, as if the music had placed a small lamp in each one. The lanterns appeared to glow more steadily, as though listening. Even the beams overhead felt closer, kinder, as if leaning down to hear every tone. The fiddle sang of moonlit seas, where the waves rose only to embrace and never to harm, of stars that hung low like lanterns, guiding slow ships toward safe harbors, of distant shores where the palms stirred in mild breezes, and the sand held the day's warmth long into the night. The patterns of the notes were simple, repeating often, so that the mind could follow them easily and gently, like walking a familiar path lined with night-blooming flowers. Soon, a second sound joined the first, a soft hum from the broad-shouldered pirate, whose deep voice wrapped itself around the melody like a quiet tide around a rock. He did not sing words. His humming was only a line of sound, rising and falling, echoing the fiddle and filling the spaces between its notes. It made the music feel fuller, as if two currents had met and flowed side by side without struggle. The woman with the dark braid added her own thread of humming, higher and lighter, weaving through the lower tones like a silver stream running beside a deeper river. Together, fiddle and voices formed a small, tender choir, singing not for show, but for comfort, as if they were tucking the whole inn into bed. The young deckhand felt the music cradle him. The slow pulse of the melody matched the rhythm of his own breathing, and each rise and fall of the tune seemed to ease something inside him that had been knotted tight since his first voyage. He imagined the notes drifting out through the window, across the harbor, touching the sleeping ships, the quiet masts, the coiled ropes, and folded sails. He could picture the music brushing the water's surface, making the silver ripples smoother, softer, more peaceful. Even the distant cliffs, with their dark silhouettes against the sky, seemed to lean inward in his mind, listening to the lullaby that floated from the small inn at the edge of the bay. Now and then, the melody changed, but never sharply. It wandered gently into variations, like a storyteller adding small, soft details to a familiar tale. A rise here spoke of a calm dawn when the sky turned slowly from gray to pearl to rose. A dip there hinted at the quiet sorrow of leaving a harbor behind, softened by the knowledge that it could be returned to. A lingering note held the feeling of standing on a deck at midnight, with the stars overhead and the sea breathing kindly below, knowing that for this one moment all was well. In every phrase there was a promise. The promise that after each crossing there would be a place like this, a low-lit hall, a warm fire, gentle music, and the company of those who understood the language of waves. The innkeeper moved to the bar and in the softest of motions refilled a couple of mugs, setting them down beside listeners who had drifted too deeply into the music to notice their thirst. He did not break the spell with words. His footsteps were almost soundless. The cook, standing in the doorway to the kitchen, leaned his shoulder against the frame and closed his eyes, letting the melody wash over him like warm water. Mira, the healer, had come down the stairs again. Drawn by the music's thread, she sat quietly near the hearth, her hands folded in her lap, the faint scent of herbs still clinging to her clothes, blending with the song as if it too were part of the harmony. Outside, the harbor listened. The wind had dropped to the gentlest of sighs, stirring only the loose ends of ropes and the tips of flowers along the tavern wall. The moon, freed from the veil of clouds, shone clearly now, laying a long, silver path across the water that seemed to lead directly to the inn's door. If any seabirds called from the distant rocks, their voices were soft and far away, easily woven into the tapestry of sound that the fiddle and the humming created. The water itself, dark and mild, lapped against the pier with a sound so regular and calm that it might have been a drum played by a very patient hand. The night had become an instrument, and the inn's music was its gentle heart. When at last the sailor let the final note fade, he did so with great tenderness, allowing it to linger in the air until it became part of the silence. No one rushed to speak. The quiet that followed was full and warm, like the pause after a blessing. The boy opened his eyes, not realizing until then that he had closed them, and saw that the lanterns seemed to glow a fraction softer, as if the music had taught them how to rest, too. The pirate's humming ceased, his chest rising and falling in slow, peaceful breaths. The woman with the dark braid smiled faintly, as if she had been given a small, precious gift and was storing it somewhere safe inside her. "Another?" the old sailor asked, his voice as gentle as the bow he still held. The innkeeper gave a small shake of his head, his eyes kind. "No," he murmured, "that was enough. Let the night keep the rest for tomorrow." The sailor nodded, understanding. Too much music, like too strong a wind, could stir the heart when what it needed most was stillness. He placed the fiddle back in its case with careful hands, closed the lid, and slid the latches into place with a soft click. The harbor inn, wrapped now in a deeper, sweeter quiet, seemed to sigh with satisfaction. The music had laid a soft layer of peace over every beam, every chair, every weary head. Dreams would come more easily now, like small boats finding their way into a gentle cove. As the guests shifted toward their beds, steps slow and unhurried, a few of them glanced toward the door, drawn by some faint thought of the moonlit harbor outside. For some, the next part of the night would be spent in sleep. For others, it would hold one more soft ritual beneath the stars. But whatever they chose, the music lingered within them, a calm, silver song that would guide their hearts through the rest of the night, like a lantern swinging quietly over a safe and peaceful shore. When the last echo of the fiddle's song had melted into the beams and the case was closed with its soft, final click, the harbor inn rested in a hush that felt almost like sleep. The lanterns burned low and steady, their flames small but sure, casting quiet halos over the worn tables and the smoothed planks of the floor. The fire in the hearth had settled into a bed of glowing embers, their red light pulsing gently, as if the inn itself were breathing in long, peaceful sighs. Around the room, benches sat a little askew, mugs stood half forgotten, and blankets lay draped over the backs of chairs, waiting for hands to gather them up. The night had grown old and kind, and it was nearly time for lids to lower and dreams to unfold. Yet, for some hearts, there remained one more small journey to make before surrendering to sleep. A quiet walk out into the silver air to speak with the moon and the tide. The young deckhand felt that pull first, a soft tug in his chest that did not feel like restlessness, but like an invitation. He had listened to stories of glowing seas and singing sands, to the storm that stayed respectfully distant, to the gentle music that had rocked the hall. Now he found himself wondering if, out beyond the door, the night might also be listening for him, just as he had listened to it through the tales and the songs. His newly healed hands, no longer aching, curled around the edge of the bench as he rose. The blanket slipped from his shoulders, but the warmth of the room clung to him for a moment longer, like a friendly hand at his back. The innkeeper watched him stand and guessed his intention without a word. He had seen this quiet procession many times, the ones who needed, before sleep, to breathe the open air, to look at the wide sky, to feel the cool touch of the night on their faces. Sometimes it was the young, whose hearts were full of new questions. Sometimes it was the old, whose hearts were full of old ones that had never entirely left. Tonight, it seemed it would be both. The broad-shouldered pirate rose as well, stretching his arms slowly, the lamplight catching on his earrings. The woman with the dark braid gathered her coat around her and followed her steps as light as a whisper on the floorboards. A few others, drawn by an instinct older than charts and compasses, joined them, moving toward the door with quiet, unhurried motions. The innkeeper reached it first and lifted the latch with care, as though opening the lid of a soft, sleeping world. When the door swung inward, a breath of cool, salt-scented air slipped in, brushing against cheeks and hair, stirring the edges of sleeves and the loose ends of scarves. The night greeted them gently, like a patient friend who had been waiting just outside. The harbor lay before them, luminous and serene. The moon rode high and full, laying a wide path of silver across the water, and the stars hung in their countless thousands over the curved line of the bay. The wind, now only a mild, steady murmur, moved through the masts and rigging, making them hum with low, contented notes. It felt like stepping from one safe room into another, from the warm wooden hall into a vast, soft chamber of sky and sea. They stepped out onto the worn stone threshold, then down to the packed earth and the beginning of the pier. The boards of the pier were smooth from years of boots and salt and weather, and they carried the faint warmth of the day's sun deep within their grain. Even now, the sound of the water was close here, a gentle, repetitive hush as the tide moved against the pilings. It was as though the sea itself was breathing in its sleep, slow and peaceful, never quite waking, but always aware. The young deckhand took a few careful steps forward, his eyes wide and shining in the moonlight. The world seemed larger than it had from inside, yet not frightening. It was a wide, quiet world, full of silver and soft sound, a world that welcomed rather than threatened. Along the edge of the pier, a few of the sailors and pirates stood in scattered shapes, each giving the others a respectful distance, not from coldness, but from tenderness. They knew that whatever words were spoken tonight, whether aloud or only in the heart, would be private offerings, small messages sent out to forces greater and gentler than themselves. The broad-shouldered pirate walked to the end of one of the pier's weathered arms and gazed out toward the horizon where, not long ago, the distant storm had glowed. Now the clouds there had thinned and drifted away, leaving the sky open and soft. He drew from his pocket a simple bit of ribbon, faded red, and rolled it slowly between his fingers. The woman with the dark braid knelt by one of the posts, where tide-smoothed stones had collected in little pockets of shadow. She reached down, her hand brushing over shells and pebbles, until she found one she liked, a small, flat stone with a pale stripe of quartz running through it, like a frozen wave. She rubbed her thumb along the stripe, feeling its smoothness, its solid quiet. The young deckhand, watching her, understood without being told that these small objects were not random. They were tiny carriers of hope, vessels for wishes that were too delicate to be held by bare, empty air. One by one, they prepared their offerings. A sailor with sun-cracked lips took a smooth shell from his pocket, its inside mother of pearl and shining softly in the moonlight. Another older man drew out a scrap of paper, folded many times. On it, in a slow, careful hand, a few words had been written, earlier words of thanks for a storm that had passed more gently than feared, for a voyage that had ended in safe harbor, for a friend's laughter heard after many months apart. He held it against his palm, as though letting it feel the night before it went on its way. The young deckhand, lacking ribbons or shells, reached into the pocket of his coat and found, to his surprise, a small piece of thin rope he had coiled absent-mindedly during a quiet watch. It was nothing special, and yet as he held it now, he felt that its twists and loops could hold a wish just as well as any polished stone. The broad-shouldered pirate cleared his throat softly and lifted his ribbon toward the moon. "For the ones still at sea," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying easily over the quiet water. "For calm winds when they need calm, and strong hulls when they must face more. Keep an eye on them old moon. You've watched us long enough to know what we need." His words were simple, yet they went out across the harbor with a weight of tenderness that made the young deckhand's chest ache in a gentle way. The pirate tied the ribbon carefully around a rope at the pier's edge, letting it hang and flutter slightly in the breeze. A small red flicker against the silver night. The woman with the dark braid stood and held her striped stone in her palm. She closed her eyes briefly, then opened them again, looking not at the distant horizon, but at the calm water lapping just below. "For homecomings," she murmured, "for every harbor that waits, let every path back be clear. Let every door open softly when we return." Then she crouched once more and slid the stone into a gap between two old boards, where it nestled snugly, touching wood that had felt countless waves. There it would remain, part of the pier that welcomed weary feet, its silent wish soaked deep into the grain. The young deckhand felt a small, warm swell of courage in his throat. He stepped closer to the edge, the little coil of rope cupped carefully in both hands. The moonlight painted his fingers silver, turning the rope into a tiny ring of pale light and shadow. He did not know exactly what to say at first. His thoughts were many and fluttering, like a flock of small birds not yet ready to land. He took a slow breath, tasting salt, wood, and the faint sweetness of flowers carried from the inn's courtyard. And then, in a voice almost too quiet to hear, yet clear enough for the listening night, he spoke. "For gentle dreams," he said, the words shy but sincere. "For quiet seas inside my head when the real ones are rough. For the courage to climb the mast and the wisdom to climb down when it is time to rest. For a place like this to come back to, again and again." He paused, feeling his heart loosen as he gave shape to each wish. Then, very carefully, he set the coil of rope onto the surface of the water just below the pier. For a moment, it floated there, a small, dark ring on the silver, rocking gently with the tide. Then a soft swell came, lifting it and carrying it outward, slowly, slowly, along the moonlit path. The boy watched until it was only a dot, then until it vanished entirely, taken not by loss, but by the great, kind hands of sea and sky. Around the pier, other wishes were offered in similarly quiet ways. A folded paper, weighted with a pebble, dropped into a pocket of calm water between posts, where it bobbed for a moment before sinking, its ink dissolving into the tide like a whispered prayer. A shell placed delicately upon a rock, where the next high wave would touch it and carry its bright curve out into deeper currents. A few words breathed silently into cupped palms, then released with a gentle exhale into the wind to be carried where they needed to go. No one watched anyone else too closely. They shared the space and the night, but allowed each heart its own soft conversation with the moon, the tide, and the listening stars. Above them, the sky gleamed with its own quiet generosity. The moon seemed to shine a little more brightly, as if in answer to these small acts of trust. The stars twinkled with a tenderness that suggested they had heard everything, even the words that had not been spoken aloud. The breeze brushed cheeks and hair like a reassuring hand, cool but not cold, reminding each person that they were part of something vast and gentle, something that moved in endless cycles of ebb and flow, departure and return, waking and sleep. At last, the innkeeper, who had been standing a little apart, stepped closer and let his gaze wander over the harbor, the ships, the offerings, and the faces of his guests. He did not speak any long wish of his own. Instead, he placed one hand flat on the pier's rail, feeling the worn wood under his palm, and whispered a simple, steady word. "Thank you." It was not directed at any one thing. It belonged to the night, the sea, the moon, and to the small miracles that happened between voyages, between storms, between a weary heart's last waking thought and its first quiet dream. One by one, they turned back toward the inn, not hurriedly, but in slow, thoughtful steps. The threshold welcomed their feet, the warm air enfolded their shoulders, and the lanterns greeted them like familiar, kindly faces. Behind them, the harbor kept the secrets of their wishes in its gentle, silver folds. Ahead of them lay beds and blankets, pillows that smelled faintly of sun-dried linen and clean wood, and sleep waiting like a calm, deep tide. As the door closed softly on the night's soft glimmer, the harbor inn gathered their hearts close, ready to cradle them through the last hours of darkness until the first pale light of morning would call them gently and peacefully to farewells and new beginnings. Morning did not come all at once to the harbor inn. It arrived slowly, like a shy guest, touching first the edge of the world and then moving inward with soft, pale hands. Long before the sun itself rose above the horizon, a thin gray light seeped into the sky, gentling the stars until they faded, one by one, as if they were small lamps being carefully lowered. A fine mist lay over the harbor, drifting in low, quiet swirls above the water, softening the shapes of ships and masts and houses along the shore. The moon's silver path dimmed and blurred, and the tide, still breathing in its peaceful rhythm, whispered against stone and wood in tones made even softer by the fog. It was an hour when everything seemed to hold its breath, not from fear, but from a tender respect for the fragile newness of the day. Inside the harbor inn, the shadows also began to thin. The embers in the hearth glowed with a faint, dull red that still held warmth, and the lanterns, which had burned bravely through the night, now showed pale glass and weary wicks, their light no longer needed as urgently. Through the small gaps where shutters did not quite meet, the first suggestion of dawn slipped in, laying gray-blue fingers across tabletops and the backs of chairs. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scents of ashes, old bread, herbs, and wool warmed by sleep. Upstairs, in the small rooms under the eaves, the gentle breathing of resting sailors and pirates began to change as bodies of their own quiet accord shifted toward waking. It was not the sudden awakening of alarm or urgency, but the gradual stirring that comes when the world itself is turning toward light. The innkeeper had risen before most, He moved through the common room with practiced care, straightening a bench here, adjusting a mug there, adding a small, patient log to the hearth so that the embers would deepen into a mild, friendly flame. He paused a moment by one of the windows and unlatched the shutter, opening it just enough to let in a thread of morning air. It slipped across the room, cool and fresh, bringing with it the soft smell of damp earth, wet stone, and the clean, salty breath of the harbor. The innkeeper closed his eyes briefly, drawing it in, feeling the quiet strength of a new day settle around his shoulders like a light cloak. Then he smiled to himself, a small, private smile, and went to help the cook with the first simple meal of the morning. In the kitchen, the cook was already at work, moving among pots and kettles with a slow, easy rhythm well suited to the early hour. He warmed porridge in a heavy pot, stirred with a wooden spoon that had seen many sunrises. He cut slices from yesterday's loaves, toasting them lightly on a metal rack near the small, new fire, letting the faint smell of browning crust drift outward. He boiled water for tea and for a mild, chicory-scented drink some of the sailors preferred, watching the steam rise in soft, curling ghosts. Across the room, Mira, the healer, sat at a small table, sprinkling dried petals of chamomile and lemon balm into a jar, refilling her stores for the next night. Her movements were quiet and careful, and the rustle of leaves in her fingers sounded almost like the whisper of the mist against the window. Gradually, the guests began to come down the stairs, drawn by habit, by the scent of warm food, and by the knowledge that a tide waits for no one, not even the most tired sailor. The broad-shouldered pirate descended first, his heavy boots softened by the worn wood, his hair a little rumpled from sleep. He looked less fierce in the pale light, more like a great weary bird readying its wings. Behind him came the woman with the dark braid, her coat folded over one arm, her eyes clear and calm. The young deckhand emerged a little later, blinking and rubbing his face with his still soft hands, the memory of dreams and distant shores lingering in his gaze like a faint glow. Others appeared in ones and twos, each step quiet, each face bearing traces of the night's rest and the day's coming journey. They gathered around the tables, and the innkeeper and cook moved among them with bowls of porridge, slices of warm toast, and mugs that steamed gently in the cool air. There was little conversation at first. The morning was too new and too delicate for many words. Instead, there were soft murmurs of thanks, the sound of spoons tapping lightly against the sides of bowls, the faint creak of chairs as bodies settled into comfortable positions. Outside, a gull called once, its cry high and distant, then fell silent again, as if even it understood that shouting would not suit this gentle hour. The mist pressed its cool face against the windows, and the world beyond looked like a picture made in watered ink, all edges blurred and softened. As they ate, the sailors and pirates began to speak in low, steady tones. They did not tell stories now. The time for stories belonged to the night. Instead, they exchanged small, practical words about wind and tide, about sails and ropes and small tasks that would need doing once they reached their decks. Yet even these words sounded different in the early light. There was no sharpness in them, no impatience. They were simply the quiet laying out of a path, like placing stepping stones carefully across a shallow stream. The broad-shouldered pirate reminded the young deckhand to check a knot he had tied the day before. The woman with the dark braid said she would show him how to fold a sail more easily. Their promises were small, but they were promises all the same. Soft threads stitching this calm morning to the unknown days ahead. When the bowls were empty and the last crusts of toast had been eaten, the innkeeper refilled mugs one final time and then stood for a moment, looking around at his gathered guests. He did not make a speech. He simply met each pair of eyes he could, offering a nod, a faint smile, a quiet touch to a shoulder if someone was within reach. His gaze carried the same unspoken blessing for all. Go safely, go gently, come back if you can. The warmth of the room seemed to deepen for a heartbeat, as if the walls themselves understood and echoed his silent wish. One by one, preparations for departure began. Coats were shrugged on, scarves wrapped around necks, belts tightened, and boots pulled firmly into place. Small bundles and sea-worn bags were lifted from where they had rested near tables and chairs. The young deckhand rolled the blanket he had used in the night and tied it neatly, his fingers moving more confidently now, as if the memory of mending the sail and of Mira's soothing touch had given them new assurance. The broad-shouldered pirate checked the pockets of his coat, making sure his little feather-light treasures, a scrap of map, a bit of ribbon, a smooth stone, were all where they should be. The woman with the dark braid fastened her cloak at the throat, its edges falling in calm folds that moved only when she walked. They made their way to the door in a loose cluster, not pushing, not hurrying, leaving space for each other as naturally as waves leave space for neighboring waves. At the threshold, they paused, not blocked by doubt, but held for a moment by the soft weight of goodbye. Morning light, still pale and tender, filtered through the slightly open door, painting long, quiet streaks of gray and silver on the floor. The mist outside seemed to peer in with mild curiosity. The innkeeper stood by the latch, his hand resting there, ready to open the day fully to them when they were ready to step through. "Thank you," said the woman with the dark braid, turning toward him. Her voice was low but clear, as gentle as the tide outside, for the bread and the light and the silence. He inclined his head, accepting the gratitude without claiming it, as one accepts a shell from the sea with appreciation, but knowing it belongs partly to larger forces. "You are always welcome between voyages," he replied. "The inn remembers those who pass through its doors." The broad-shouldered pirate grinned, a mild, easy grin that showed more kindness than bravado. "Then may it remember us as quiet this time," he said softly. "We will try not to trouble its dreams." The young deckhand hesitated just within the doorway. He looked back at the common room, at the hearth, now burning with a small, bright flame, at the tables, empty but bearing faint marks of last night's bowls and cups, at the stairs where Mira and the old fiddler and the cook would soon move again in their gentle tasks. He felt a tender tug in his chest, as if some part of him wished to curl up on one of the benches and stay in this safe, warm place where storms were only distant lights and hard work was followed by soothing hands and music. But he also felt the steady pull of the sea, not as a roar or a command, but as a quiet, patient invitation. He knew, as sailors always know, that the harbor's gift is rest, not escape. He took a small step back toward the innkeeper. "I'll bring a story next time," he said, his voice shy but earnest, "a gentle one, for your fire." The innkeeper's eyes softened, their color catching the faint light like still water catching sky. "I will keep a place for it," he answered, "and for you." With that, the boy turned again toward the misty morning, his heart lighter and steadier, holding both the memory of the inn and the promise of future nights within its walls. At last, the innkeeper opened the door wide, and the guests stepped out into the first pale light. The harbor greeted them with a soft hush, the mist parting around their figures as they walked down the pier. Their boots sounded hollow yet comforting on the damp boards, echoing quietly between water and sky. From their moorings, the ships emerged slowly from the fog, their hulls dark and patient, their masts reaching up into the brightening gray like lines drawn toward a waking sun. Crew members already aboard moved with measured calm, untying ropes, checking lines, adjusting sails that hung in loose, expectant folds. Farewells were not loud. There were no shouted calls or dramatic gestures. Instead, there were steady, clasped hands, brief embraces that spoke of long trust, nods that said more than words about journeys shared and dangers faced together. The broad-shouldered pirate placed a hand briefly on the young deckhand's shoulder, squeezing once before turning to board his ship. The woman with the dark braid rested her palm for a second against the inn's outer wall, as if pressing a small part of herself into the wood, leaving a memory behind to keep it company. The boy gave one last look toward the innkeeper, who stood at the door with arms folded loosely, his figure framed by the soft glow within. Then, slowly and calmly, the ships began to move. Lines were cast off with gentle splashes, sails unfurled, catching the faintest breath of morning wind, billowing not with sudden force, but with a gradual, graceful fullness. The mist thinned as they glided forward, revealing more of the wide, silver water and the soft, rising sky. The harbor watched them go, the stones of the pier and the little flowers between them holding the memory of their footsteps. The innkeeper remained at the doorway until each vessel had slipped beyond the curve of the bay, their shapes growing smaller and softer, like thoughts that drift calmly into the distance. At last, only the quiet harbor remained, its water smoothing itself around empty berths, its masts like still lines drawn against an ever-lightening sky. The morning was no longer pale. It was turning gently gold at the edges, as the sun, still low, sent its first soft rays over the water and across the roof of the harbor inn. The innkeeper looked out for a moment longer, then breathed in deeply, filling his lungs with the cool, bright air. Another set of journeys had begun. Another night of rest had done its work. With a final, fond glance at the calm silver tide, he turned back inside, leaving the door slightly open to let the day's light follow him in, readying the inn for the quiet hours between farewells and the next gentle arrivals. When the ships had slipped beyond the curve of the headland and the last faint echoes of departing footsteps had melted into the morning air, a gentle stillness settled over the harbor inn. The open door let in the cool light of early day, and the mist, now thinning, drifted lazily past like the tail end of a long, soft dream. The innkeeper stood in the doorway for a few moments more, his gaze resting on the quiet harbor, where only empty berths and softly lapping water remained. The tide moved in a slow, silver rhythm against the stones, and the faint cries of distant gulls seemed far away and harmless, like the memory of a song. Then, with a calm breath, he turned back inside, ready to tend to the inn itself, as one might tend to a dear friend after a long night of kindness. The common room, touched now by strands of pale sunlight, showed traces of the night's gentle work. Chairs stood a little askew, as if they had leaned closer to hear the stories and music. A stray crumb of bread glowed like a tiny pale pebble on a table. A faint smudge of ash marked the stone near the hearth, where a log had shifted. The air still held the ghost of herbs and roasted grain, and beneath it all lay the deeper, quieter scent of wood, salt, and thyme. The innkeeper moved among these small remnants with unhurried hands, straightening, wiping, sweeping, but never in a harsh or hurried way. Each bowl lifted, each chair tucked in, each cooled mug carried to the kitchen felt like part of a slow, soothing ritual, a way of helping the inn breathe out the last of the night and draw in the fresh, clear air of day. In the kitchen, the cook washed the last of the breakfast bowls, the water in the basin warm and clouded with soap, sending tiny bubbles drifting across the surface like small, shimmering dreams. He hummed under his breath, a quiet, tuneless murmur that matched the soft clink of pottery and the hush of water pouring away. He hung cloths to dry and set loaves on a high shelf, then opened the small back window so the mild breeze could wander in, bringing with it the faint scent of flowers from the courtyard. There, in the shelter of the inn's walls, the herbs and blossoms lifted their faces toward the growing light, their leaves beaded with tiny droplets from the morning mist. Thyme, chamomile, and sea lavender swayed together, their colors soft and their fragrance gentle, lending their calm to the stone and wood that surrounded them. Mira, the healer, moved quietly through the hall with a basket over her arm, collecting discarded bits of cloth, a forgotten strip of bandage, the empty jar that had once held her salve. She ran her fingers lightly along the back of a chair, as if checking its pulse, and paused for a moment by the hearth, looking into the fading glow of embers that still held a low, cherry-colored light. She knew that just as hands and shoulders required care, so did places. The inn had carried a great, soft weight of stories, aches, and dreams through the night. Now it needed a little rest of its own. She placed a small bundle of dried herbs on the mantel, tied with a thin strand of twine, a simple, fragrant charm of peace, and the faint smell of lavender and rosemary rose to mingle with the last breath of smoke. Outside, the day grew brighter, but never harsh. The sun climbed gently, veiled now and then by thin white clouds that softened its rays. The harbor went about its quieter work, fishermen mending nets along the shore, a lone rowboat gliding across the silver surface, the water parting around its hull in calm ripples. The headland stood watch, its rocky slopes dotted with hardy grasses and tiny, wind-bent flowers that nodded in the mild breeze. Birds traced easy arcs across the sky, their wings catching light without strain. It was a day made for slow tasks, for the mending of small things, for walking without haste along the edge of the tide and listening to the water's quiet secrets. Within the inn, time moved in long, gentle stretches. The innkeeper counted stores, not with tight worry, but with the contentment of someone who trusts that needs will be met in their season. The cook kneaded a new batch of dough, his hands moving in a firm, rhythmic pattern that made the flour and water yield to something soft and promising. Mira refilled her jars of dried leaves and petals, her fingers careful and calm. The colors of her herbs pale golds, soft greens, muted purples like a small garden preserved in glass. They spoke very little, but the silence between them was companionable, a quiet woven from years of shared work and shared care for those who wandered between sea and shore. As afternoon passed into evening, the light outside the windows shifted from gold to a gentler rose, then to the cool, tender blue that comes just before dusk. Shadows stretched and softened, and the harbor's silver darkened to a deeper, smoother sheen. The first star appeared, shy and small, above the headland, followed by another and another, until the sky once more became a wide, calm bowl of scattered lights. The tide, returning yet again in its ancient cycle, brushed the stones of the pier with a soft, familiar sound. A lantern on a lone boat bobbed gently in the distance, its glow reflected as a thin, trembling line upon the water. The world outside was readying itself for night in the same patient way that the innkeepers readied their rooms, without rush, without fuss, with the quiet confidence of repetition and care. The inn, having done its day's small labors, began to dim its own brightness. The cook banked the kitchen fire, leaving only a small, steady heart of coals to keep the chill away. Mira climbed the stairs to her room, her basket now filled with neatly tied bundles that would wait for the next tide of weary hands. The innkeeper moved through the common room one last time, trimming the lantern wicks, lowering their flames until they cast only a faint amber glow. He straightened a tapestry here, adjusted a chair there, smoothing rough edges, tucking in the inn's corners as one might tuck in a beloved child. The floorboards creaked softly under his feet, not complaining, merely announcing each footstep in the language of old wood. When he opened the door to look out upon the harbor, night had fully fallen. But it was a gentle night, wrapped in deep blue and silver. The moon had returned, this time a little smaller, its face slightly changed, yet no less kind. Its light lay upon the water in a long, shimmering band, and the reflections of stars quivered lightly in the ripples near the shore. The flowers in the courtyard had closed their petals, holding the day's warmth in their hearts, and the herbs released a richer scent now that the air was cooler and still. A mild breeze drifted by, touching the innkeeper's hair and the edge of his sleeve, carrying with it a sense of the wide, sleeping world, the hills, the headland, the distant open sea resting beneath the sky's watchful gaze. He stepped out for a moment onto the threshold and let his hand rest against the doorframe, feeling the sturdy grain beneath his palm. The Harbor Inn had stood here through many seasons, bright summers and quiet winters, years of busy traffic, and years of gentle, slow days. It had watched ships come and go, seen faces grow older and kinder, listened to countless stories told in countless voices. Tonight, with its rooms empty of guests and its tables cleared, it seemed more than a building. It felt like a living being, breathing softly in the dark, its heart made of wood and stone, its thoughts made of the memories entrusted to it. The innkeeper looked up at the stars and felt once again the gratitude he had whispered at dawn. Then, with a quiet nod to the silver tide and the soft wind, he stepped back inside and closed the door, leaving it latched but never locked against hope. He moved through the common room in the dim light, pausing a last time by the hearth. The fire there was a faint glow, more embers than flame, yet still warm enough to keep the chill away from the inn's bones. He laid one small log gently on top, not to rouse a blaze, but to feed a low, steady warmth that would last through the night. The log caught with a mild crackle, sending up a few sparks that floated briefly and then faded, like tiny fireflies drifting into sleep. The innkeeper watched until the light settled into a soft, quiet flicker, then turned toward the stairs, climbing slowly, his hand trailing along the smooth banister polished by many passing palms. Above, the rooms waited in reassuring order. Beds were made, their linens smooth and faintly scented of sun and soap. Small shutters were closed just enough to keep out the chill, but left slightly ajar to let in the distant murmurs of the sea and the whisper of the wind among the eaves. Each room held a sense of readiness, like a gentle, open hand. They would stand like this through the night, empty yet not lonely, as if holding their breath in peaceful expectation of the next weary traveler who would need a quiet place to dream. At last, the innkeeper reached his own narrow room under the roof. He lit a single small candle and watched its flame steady itself, casting a circle of golden light that barely reached the corners. Through his little window, he could see a strip of sky thick with stars and a sliver of moonlight resting on the distant water. He sat on the edge of his bed for a moment, listening. The creak of old beams, the soft sigh of the wind along the roof, the faint, steady hush of the tide rolling in and out below, all of it folded together into a lullaby that had no words, only a deep, patient rhythm that spoke of time and tides, of voyages and returns, of nights that healed and days that began again. When he lay down and closed his eyes, the harbor inn lay down with him in its own way. Its lanterns dimmed to tiny stars behind thick glass, its floors, its walls, its beams relaxed into stillness. The herbs in the courtyard breathed their fragrance into the night, and the flowers, sleeping with their petals tucked in, dreamed of sunlit mornings to come. Outside, the harbor held its quiet vigil, moonlight on water, starlight on stone, the wind's soft hands smoothing over every surface. The inn, the harbor, the sea, and the sky all seemed to share a single peaceful breath. And so, as the night deepened and the world grew softer and more silver, the harbor inn fell asleep. It slept with the memory of gentle pirates and kind sailors held safely in its wooden heart, with the echo of low stories and tender music folded into its rafters, with the scent of bread, herbs, and salt still lingering in its dreams. It rested not in emptiness, but in fullness, knowing that in some distant hour, new footsteps would cross its threshold, new hands would rest upon its tables, new wishes would be whispered to the moon and the tide. Until that time, it would dream softly by the harbor's edge, wrapped in moonlight and the hush of the sea, like a great, quiet guardian keeping watch over every soul who had ever found peace within its walls. And as you drift now into your own deep, gentle sleep, may you feel that same soft shelter around your heart, a warm inn at the edge of your thoughts, its lanterns glowing just for you, its rooms prepared, its hearth waiting, holding your dreams with tender hands and keeping you safe and peaceful until the silver morning comes.